Loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the four living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song, except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead, with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia.
Thank you, Luke. Will you pray with me as we begin? Father, thank you for your word read to us today. I pray, as Revelation 1 said, that we would be blessed from hearing it, but also blessed in keeping it. And so, God, in the time that we have, I pray that you would open our minds and our hearts to see Revelation 14 for all that it is, that it would instruct us, that it would inspire us, and change us. So use me. God, I'm unworthy today. And so by your grace and in your strength, God, would your Spirit move and illuminate this text for us. Praise in your name. Amen. All right. Well, good morning, Redemption. Thanks for being here. If this is your first time here at Redemption, thanks for coming. We're in the middle of a series on the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible. We started back in January. We're in chapter 14. Obviously, there's 22 chapters. We'll end in June. So that's kind of the direction we're going. But thanks for being here. If it's your first time, there's a QR code on the seat back in front of you. If you scan that, you can put in some information. Thankful you're here. If you go out today on your way out to the Connect counter, we have a gift for you. Just thankful that you'd be here and worship with us. I know there's a lot of places you could be on a Sunday. So thanks for being here. Here's the direction we're going today. We're going to kind of look through Revelation chapter 14 here and hopefully draw some stuff out for us. We're going to take communion together as a church. So kind of as we wrap up the message, we'll transition into that. If you've never taken communion before, we'll kind of walk through what that looks like together. And then we'll sing some more, worship our God before we leave today. But let's do Revelation chapter 14. I want to begin with an old comic strip, Peanuts, if you know Charlie Brown. I know it's kind of hard to see, so let me read it to you. This is Sally and Charlie Brown. Sally says, I memorized the Bible verse we were supposed to memorize for Sunday. And Charlie Brown says, what verse? I don't know. Now you made me forget. Maybe it was something Moses said or something from the book of Reevaluation. Forgetting is not always a bad thing, Charlie Brown says. Now, I'm thankful you laughed a little bit. I don't actually find that funny. Is that a joke? I don't know what that is. It's supposed to be funny, but I didn't laugh when I saw it. However, I share it with you because Sally said maybe it's something from the book of Reevaluation, not Revelation. She got it wrong, but actually, hear this, she kind of got it right because the book of Revelation was written for us not just to know something of what is coming, but so that you could reevaluate your life today. And so there's something in this text, in fact, the entire book, that helps us to reevaluate, understand life as a whole, what's going on around us, but also we can reevaluate our own lives. I said this from the very beginning of this book that we've been walking through, Revelation, that things are not as they seem. Revelation is a pulling back of the curtain to begin to see things that we would not normally see. Things are not as they seem, and so Revelation calls for us to reevaluate how we see the world and how we see ourselves. And think about it. Here's some of the things we've said. Like when we look around, we might see a lot of chaos, confusion in the world. Things are kind of out of control, but things are not as they seem. There is a throne, and Jesus sits on the throne. He is seated securely, right? Things are not as they seem. So, what do? You reevaluate your life in light of that. Or at times, it can appear that evil is winning. Maybe you've experienced this in your own life. Why does evil keep happening? Why is this happening? What I'm just trying to do good? Well, we'll find out. We even saw it today in the reading, but throughout the book of Revelation, is that God, the unseen reality is God is going to judge. And so I reevaluate my life in the world with that understanding. Over and over again in the book of Revelation, Revelation presents us with really only one of two options. This kind of theme that runs through the book of Revelation. You will either be a person of the Lamb or a person of the dragon. The dragon showed up in chapter 12. And we know this in studying the book of Revelation. The lamb, the lion lamb, that is Jesus. You'll be a follower of Jesus, or you'll be a follower of the dragon, which is identified as Satan. Last week, chapter 13, we saw that the dragon and then the unholy trinity, the two beasts, the Antichrist and the false prophet, that are working ultimately to steal your worship away from God the Father, from Jesus, and bring it to Satan the dragon. So today, in what was just read for us, chapter 14, we have a vision of the redeemed in heaven. I hope you saw that. We have some angels who are making announcements. We have some angels that are bringing judgment. But right in the middle of chapter 14, we have a statement, a command or a call, if you would, that's almost identical to one we saw in chapter 13. Verse 12, look at it. It says this: here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus Christ. So I kind of want to draw our attention to this today because there's a lot going on. We're going to try to walk through and make sense and untangle the mess maybe of chapter 14 in our minds to understand what's going on. But John reminds us that there is a call, one, for you to endure, for you to keep the commands of God, and for you to keep the faith. And so, in light of Revelation and the reevaluating of our lives, we ought to consider, am I enduring? Am I keeping the commands? Am I keeping my faith in Jesus? But actually, in order to live this out, I think there's a more important question that's kind of underneath the text, and that question is this: is it worth it? This is the question underneath the text. Is enduring worth it? Is following Jesus worth it? Is laying down my life for him actually worth it? Is giving God a blank check with my life, use me however you would want, God, is it actually worth it? Is obedience worth it? Is, in the words of Paul, is fighting the fight, running the race, enduring to the end. Is it actually worth it? Is the effort needed to endure worth it? Is the discipline needed to keep God's commands worth it? Isn't that question, is it worth it? This is kind of embedded in a lot of places in your life. In fact, it's underneath so much of what you do. For example, if you go to the gym and try to eat healthy, you have to ask yourself over and over again, is this really worth it? Because if it's not worth it, you're not going to keep doing it, right? Or maybe, have you ever had like surgery, like knee surgery before, and now you have to go to rehab on a regular basis, and you have to ask yourself over and over again, is this really worth it? Is it worth going to the doctor and they're going to keep like hurting me and making me work harder and harder? Is it worth it in? This is the question, right? Underneath things. Or like if you're a college student looking to get a degree someday in the middle of like midterms or finals, you ask the question, is this worth it? Like, is it worth all the work? Is it actually going to pay off in the end? And everyone's like, no, it's not. No, it is. Keep working. Or how about this? Maybe you're in a marriage and we're having marriage problems, and we have to ask the question, is it worth like working through those things for the sake of this relationship, right? This is the question that's behind actually a lot of things in your life. Is it worth it? 3 years ago, summer, my family found ourselves in Yellowstone National Park. I don't know if you've been there before. Beautiful place, like Old Faithful, the geyser that goes up, and just like animals and bison and elk and all, just super pretty. And this one day, my family, we're driving through Yellowstone, and our phones don't work because it's like the middle of nowhere, and we don't have a clue where we're at. It's not going to tell us. So we're using, get this, guys, we're using an old school paper map, okay? So we have a map of Yellowstone, I know, and I'm trying to figure out where we're at. And on the map, it shows us that we're near like a waterfall. So like there's like this river kind of down this canyon. There's a waterfall apparently somewhere over in that direction. I'm not totally sure how far, but we're like, wait, we should go check out this waterfall. There doesn't appear to be any like trails that go to it, just kind of labeled on the map. And so we thought, man, we'll just, if we get close enough in the car, we can kind of walk down, we'll be able to see it, right? So we pull off on the side of the road, just kind of pull out there. We get out. At the time, I have 4 kids now, but I only had 3 at the time. My oldest was 10, Caden was 10. My youngest, Judah, he was 5 years old. And so we pull over, get out, and we have to kind of climb down. It's like down in a canyon, kind of, right? So we have to kind of climb down to the river there. And our thought is, we'll just go upstream because eventually you'll run into the waterfall, right? Like if you just go upstream, eventually you'll run into it. So we're going, but it turned out it was a lot harder than I thought. Because we're like having to like jump from rock to rock. The water's like, some places it's a little bit wider and slower. You kind of walk in, or it's like rushing kind of. And we're trying to, and there's no trail on the side because it's like a canyon. So we're trying to do it. But then I have a 5-year-old who's like done before we got down the embankment, you know? So guess who's carrying the 4-year-old or the 5-year-old? He's acting like a 3-year-old. But pick him up. And we're like, you know, moving down and trying to like take him from this rock and put him in that rock and then step forward and take him to the next and to the next, right? So our whole family's working up the creek. And here's the question in the back of my head. Is it worth it? Is this really worth it? There came this point. See, we had misjudged the map and how far this would be. And so we're like weaving, you know, the river's kind of doing this kind of S-curve stuff. So I don't know, we got around a couple of S-curves. And it was always like this. If we just get around that bend, we're going to see it. I know it. And we get around it. There's no waterfall. No waterfall. And then I'm looking at my wife, and we didn't use this language, but I'm like, is this worth it? And so I come to the conclusion, it's not, and we ought to go back. But she's like, we're going, right? So we just keep going. Now, finally, we come around the bends, and there's this waterfall. Guys, amazing. Was it worth it? Absolutely. In fact, I would do it 100 times, carrying a 5-year-old Judah over and over again to see it again. So worth it. Now, see, here's the thing about life, though. Oftentimes, we don't get to see the end. Like this, like you don't know if it's worth it. Like we're going through school. I don't know if it'll be worth it. I hope it is. That's why you're choosing to do it, right? I hope doing all this exercise is going to result in something good. We don't know. But when it comes to the Bible, actually, to live the Christian life, to do what John said, to endure, to keep the commands, to live by faith, is it really worth it? You know what Revelation is given to tell us? It is. It's a picture of the waterfall. We can see the results at the end. and it ought to give us the desire then to move forward. So is it worth it? Here's what John would say. He would say, remember the future. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Here's what you have to do. Remember the future, what is coming. Now, let me take a moment. I want to kind of unpack Revelation chapter 14 for you. We're not going to do it like, normally I kind of go systematically, verse 1 all the way through what would be verse 20. We're actually going to kind of go backwards here. But I want to begin by talking just for a moment about literary devices. And I know I just said that, and you're like, oh, that's boring, because that's what I would think. But let me just do this real quick, okay? Hang with me. Put on your thinking cap. I promise you'll thank me afterwards for this. This will be really helpful for us. Chapters 14 and actually 15. We didn't read 15. We'll read it next week and talk about it. But chapters 14 and 15 are written in a way that scholars would call in a chiastic structure. It's a chiasm or chiasm, depending on how you want to pronounce it. A chiasm is a literary device that helps show us kind of the central points of a passage. So a passage, or maybe even a single verse, will like build up to a point and then recede from that point. Let me give you an example. Really well-known verse, Romans chapter 10, verse 9 and 10. You probably know this. Anyone who confesses with their mouth, believes in their heart, they will be saved. It kind of builds up to be saved, and then it actually recedes from there. Let me show you. It says this, if you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God is raised from the dead, you will be saved. It's all building up to this point. You will be saved. But notice then, it descends from there in a similar way. For with your heart, and earlier it was in your heart, you believe and are justified, and believe. And with your mouth, Jesus is Lord. And then you profess your faith and are saved. You declare with your mouth, right? Do you see the chiastic structure here, how it's building off one another to finally get to that central point? Now, all of it is important. In fact, if we were to preach it, we can study the whole thing. But there's something here that when Paul wrote it is trying to point us to. What's the point of it? The central idea? This is how one is saved, that you ought to be saved. And chiasms happen all throughout the Bible. Super cool. In fact, my favorite one, you can go study this, Genesis. As far as I know, probably the biggest one in the Bible. It's the story of Noah, actually. In Genesis, takes place over a lot of chapters. It'd be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, then comes back down. You know what the center point of the story of Noah is? And God remembered Noah. That's the center part of the entire story of Noah. Super cool. So there's a lot of these in the Bible. All throughout literature, you can find this kind of stuff of how people write to help us understand. Now, I say all that because Revelation 14 and 15 are designed in the exact same way, in a chiastic structure, pointing to something in the middle. So let me show it to you. What we'll see, chapter 14, the first 5 verses, is the redeemed. We get a picture of them in heaven. And actually, what we didn't read was Revelation 15, the entire chapter, it's only 8 verses, is a picture of the redeemed in heaven. And then we have 2 sets of angels. Verse 6 through 13, there are 3 angels making these proclamations of judgment. And then on the backside there, 15 through 20, you have 3 angels who are enacting the judgment, doing something. But the centerpiece, the Son of Man reaps, or harvests, or about to see, brings judgment. Everything is pointing to verse 14. Look at verse 14. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on that cloud, one like a, underline this, Son of Man. Now, who's the Son of Man? This is Jesus. We know this from the book of Daniel, talks about the Son of Man. Earlier in the book of Revelation, we saw the Son of Man. This is the Lamb. This is Jesus. This is the Lion Lamb. And so when we read it, we can say, then I looked, and behold, a white cloud. Seated on the cloud was Jesus with a golden crown. He's ruling. He has authority. And what's he holding? A sharp sickle in his hand. You know what a sickle is? It's got a handle. It's like got a knife. It's kind of curved like this. They would use for harvesting. Now, typically, when you see that, you know what you think of? Horror movie. That's what you think of, right? That's like like this would be on like the front of a movie cover or something for some kind of like really scary movie, right? But actually, a sickle was a really practical device. It was curved in such a way that you could hold like the grain, you could hold the wheat, and then you could like cut it down, or the grapevines you could cut to then take the grapes off. it was literally practical advice. And so we see here this image that John gets is of Jesus, and he has this in his hands for harvesting. And so Jesus is going to go out to harvest, and let me interpret this for you, and then you're going to see it unpacked in a moment. But he is going out to judge mankind. There's going to be a judgment day. Evil is going to be held accountable. The righteous will be saved. Let me go back to the chiasm just for a second, because what we see here is the redeemed, then we see the angels, and the center of it is the Son of Man who reaps. So, let me go back to our original question. Is it worth it? Yes. Remember the future. What are to remember? Here it is. Ready? Center parts. There will be a day of judgment. This is the point of Revelation 14 and 15. Is it all worth it? Remember, he's writing to the 7 churches who are under persecution. Some of them had given in to temptation, are falling apart. Is it worth enduring? Is it worth keeping the commands of God, keeping faith? Absolutely. Remember the future. What ought we to remember? There is a day of judgment coming. There will be a day. And this is not new information, church. It's not. We see this throughout the entire Bible. Paul said the same thing, 2 Corinthians 5:10, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for him, what is done in the body, whether good or evil." There's going to be a day of judgment. Peter said it, 2 Peter 3:7, "But by the same word the heavens and the earth now exist, are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly." There's coming a day of judgment. Okay, now let's unpack chapter 14. Understanding the center point is that there is a day of judgment. Jesus will judge. Let's look at the last 3 angels, though. That's verse 15 through verse 20. What you discover in verse 15 through 20 is there are 2 harvests that are taking place. Verse 15 and 16, Jesus is harvesting for salvation. Verse 17 through 20, the angel is harvesting for wrath. There are 2 different harvests that are taking place, one for salvation and one for wrath. Again, not new information. Jesus said the same thing would take place. Matthew 13, verse 30, "Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, the harvesters, gather the weeds first, bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into the barn." 2 different harvests, one to be burned and one to be kept in the barn. There's only one of 2 options, okay? One of those 2 places. So is it worth it? Remember the future. There will be a day of judgment. Now, what we see in verse 15, all the way through verse 20, I want to make a point of this, is that there is a day coming, it is certain, which also means at some point it will be too late. At some point, there is a point of no return. This comes in one of 2 ways. One, we know this, that your days are numbered. There's an expiration date on your life. Now, you don't know when it is. Only God knows. But there is a limit to our life, and there is a day that will come when it will be too late. There's also going to be a judgment day when God will judge mankind where it will be too late. And you understand, right? Like, once it's too late, there's like no going back. You understand that. My wife's birthday was just a couple weeks ago, April 5th. And, well, guys, I was too late. So the day before her birthday, I was like, I should probably get her a present, which is already too late, right? So I got on Amazon, and I bought her something, but it turned out it wouldn't come till the day after her birthday. So we're already in trouble. But don't worry, I can solve all problems. So I came into work on her birthday, and I made a little, like, graphic thing, like a gift certificate-looking thing for the gift that would come the next day, right? And I folded that thing up, and I put it in a nice envelope for her. Day went by, and then I left work, and I left it sitting on my desk. So that night, I'm already kind of, like, sheepish about this whole thing, so I'm, like, not giving her a present. We did all, like, the family stuff, dinner and, like, birthday kind of stuff. And it's like 8 o'clock at night, and my kids are like getting ready for bed, and they're like, "Dad, when are you going to give Mom her present?" And I was like, "Now! I've been saving it for last." And so then I go to my backpack to get out my card thing, and it's not there. No, it's all the way back here. So I did the most logical thing. I whispered to Caden, "Caden, get me an envelope." And then I found an old bill in our house, and I flipped it over, and I wrote the gift, good for whatever it was, and folded it up and put it in there and then walked it over and handed it to her. There comes a point, it's just too late, guys. Like, there's no coming back from that, right? Now, thankfully, April 5th is not Judgment Day. And my wife is a wife of grace. So it all turned out okay in the end. But you understand what I mean, right? Like, there's coming a day when it's just too late. So is it worth it? Remember the future. There will be a judgment day. And the question becomes, where will I be on that judgment day? We're going to see in a second a vision of heaven. That's what we saw in the first 5 verses of chapter 14, also chapter 15. But let me point out the other side, okay? So there are those who were reaped, harvested to salvation, but then there are those who are harvested towards the wrath of God. Look at verse 19. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress, look at it, of the wrath of God. And so here, like, John is mixing a metaphor with reality, actually. He's like, here's what I see. They're taking the wine, they're taking the grapes, taking it, they're putting it in the wine press, but then he says this wine press is the wrath of God. This is judgment. It's horrific. It's scary. In fact, it's described in verse 20. And the winepress was trodden outside the city. Look at it. And blood flowed from the winepress. Not grape juice. Blood flowed as high as a horse's bridle. We're talking a couple feet in the air and 1,600 stadia. That's 200 miles of blood that is flowing a couple feet high. This is death. This is suffering. This is judgment. This is horrific. Okay, this is supposed to grab your attention. Now, I told you Revelation is calling you to reevaluate your life. So here's what I want to do with kind of my time this morning. I want to give you 4 reevaluation questions, okay, to evaluate your life. Here's question number 1. Which side of judgment am I on? Which side am I going to be on of judgment when that day comes? It is coming. It is coming. Which side will I be on? Will I be on the side of suffering and death, or will I be on the side of salvation? And we're going to see that side in just a moment. This is the most important question you could ever ask. Which side of judgment am I on? Okay, hold that question in your head. Let's go back, though, now, because remember our chiasm going on. We just looked at the second 3 angels. Let's go look at the first 3 angels, because actually the first 3 angels, again, similar to the second 3, it's actually going to help us understand the second 3 way better, okay? It'll give us better language and understanding, better vision of what's going on. So go back to verse 6. It says this, and I saw another angel, this is angel number 1, flying directly overhead with an, underline it, eternal gospel to proclaim to all those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. So we see this angel, and he's proclaiming the gospel, the eternal gospel. Is what we know is the gospel, that Jesus would come and die on our behalf. This is what he is proclaiming. He's proclaiming what I would call the 4 words of the gospel. 1, sin. You were created to be in relationship with God, but because of sin, your relationship with God has been broken. You're guilty of wrong, of violating the holiness of God, and it demands justice. And you feel the weight of sin all around us, and you feel it in your own life. We have a problem. It is sin, but the second word of the gospel is Jesus. That God sent his son Jesus to live the life you could not live, to die the death you could not die. And Jesus goes to the cross in your place to pay for that sin. In fact, I find it interesting that verse 20 told us that this winepress was taken outside the city, and that's where the blood flowed. Do you know where Jesus' blood flowed on the cross? Outside the city of Jerusalem. And so the imagery here is this. There's one of 2 options. Your blood flows, or the blood of Jesus flows. Those are the only 2 options. So we have a sin problem that has to be paid for. The justice of God demands it, and it's going to be paid for by you or paid for by Jesus. Sin, Jesus, grace. Jesus dies for you. He gives you a gift that you could never earn and you do not deserve. It's one-way love directed at you, not because you can do anything back for God. He simply gives you the gift. I will go to the cross for you, die and rise again, conquering sin and death. And it results in my fourth word, hope. Sin, Jesus, grace, and hope. You now have something to live for. You don't need to fear. You know the end of the story. And it's this gospel that is being proclaimed to all those who dwell on earth. Now look at verse 7. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth and the sea and the springs of water." So after he proclaims the gospel, that's what you and I ought to believe. Sin has separated us. Jesus came. It's free act of grace. It gives us hope for the future. This is what we believe. And then he tells us, and now this is what you will do as a result of that belief. You will fear God, give him glory. Why? Because the hour of, here it is, judgment has come. Remember, there's connection between the two sets of angels. Judgment. And you are to worship him because he made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. How will I know if I believe the eternal gospel? It's going to come out in a fear of God, a giving glory to God, and a worship of God. This is how one will know. And then I'll even go further and say this. You will endure, you will keep the commands of God, and you will have faith. So that first question, which side of judgment am I on? Maybe you hear that question, you're like, well, I don't know. In fact, I'm afraid I might be on the wrong side. What's the answer? The answer is the first angel, the angel of the eternal gospel. Do you believe that Jesus died for your sin? Free act of grace to give you hope. That is how you get on the right side. If I were to define these angels, the first angel I would define it as an eternal gospel. Now look at the second angel. Verse 8, it says this, another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen," and underline this one, "fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." If the first angel was one of the eternal gospel, here's the second angel. It's the fall of Babylon. It says Babylon the Great. That phrase is going to show up 6 times in the book of Revelation. This is the first time it shows up. It primarily is going to show up in chapter 17. We'll deal with that in a couple weeks. But what is Babylon? What is that? Well, it's a place. In fact, today it's a city in Iraq, Babylon. There used to be a great nation of Babylon. In 96 AD, when the book of Revelation was written for us, Babylon had fallen already. There was no Babylon nation. So why does he say Babylon will fall? Because Babylon had become to be known as evil, a word used to describe those who rebel against God. Actually, think of it this way. Paul says that believers, Christians, our citizenship is in heaven. So you might say this, unbelievers, their citizenship is in Babylon. Right, so for Christians, our citizenship is in heaven. For unbelievers, our citizenship is in Babylon. Babylon represented a system of thinking that denied God and embraced a human way of thinking. When you think of Babylon, you might think of the Tower of Babel. This is when mankind, in their own self-centeredness, tried to build this tower to get to God, to make a name for themselves. Like, we're going to be something, lower God, elevate ourselves. To the original hearers, when they heard Babylon, they actually thought of Rome, because Rome was often referred to as Babylon, an anti-God nation. But what I want you to see in our text here, in verse 8, is that Babylon is calling out to you. She who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. She's calling out for you not to endure, not to walk in obedience, not to live by faith. Babylon symbolizes an intoxication with immorality in all of its forms, particularly in the form of sexual immorality. So this picture here that we see is exactly what we see in our culture today. People who indulge in, who drink down the sexual pleasures of temporary pursuits in this world, thinking that there is satisfaction and delight found in them, and Revelation shouts loudly and clearly, the cup itself that you're drinking, it will prove empty, it will not satisfy. You can chase after what Babylon says is important, and it will never deliver. In fact, it will do the exact opposite. What we're about to read is, you indulge in the wine of this world, and you will drink from the cup of the wrath of God. That imagery is so strong. So as Jesus judges, what we see here is judgment day comes, that he will destroy Babylon. He will destroy this way of thinking. Babylon will fall, sin will fall, temptation will fall, whatever it promises will fall, it will not deliver. Whatever forces might come against you from Babylon, it will not win in the end. So let me ask reevaluation question number 2. Am I controlled by something that will fall? Number 1, which side of judgment am I on? Okay, but here's the second question for you, maybe as believers. Do you find yourself controlled by Babylon? Giving in to Babylon, something that ultimately will fall? Has my heart and mind been captivated by the empty promises of this world? Money, a relationship, power, sex. And the question is it worth it to endure, to keep the commandments of God? Remember the future, remember judgment. Babylon will fall. It will not deliver in the end. Third angel, verse 9. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone, you can underline this, worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand. We talked about this last week, that the beast, this Antichrist, will be desiring worship. And there will be those who are identified with a mark. I don't believe it's a physical mark. It's speaking of an identity thing of those who worship the beast. And the warning is this: if you worship the beast, look at verse 10, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath. So I just talked about. Poured full strength into the cup of his anger. It's actually language in the first century when someone would have a glass of wine, they would often cut it, like 50% wine, 50% water. Or maybe 1/3 wine, 2/3 water. So it wasn't as strong. You could drink it for longer before you became intoxicated. But the language here is like this, that God is actually going to give you the full amount. It's not cuts. He's going to pour the full amount off. And guys, this is scary. The full wrath of God is poured. Because we know now that you and I, when we sin, you might feel this in your life. You feel the effects of sin. You feel a portion of his wrath, a cut amount of his wrath. But there is coming a day when the full amounts will be poured. So he says, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Verse 11, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have, look at this, no rest, day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. So if angel number 1 was the eternal gospel, angel number 2, the fall of Babylon, here's angel number 3, it's the fire of hell. And it's passages like this that give us kind of vivid detail of what hell is, a terrifying detail. Now, I don't honestly love preaching on hell. I find that to be like a little overwhelming. And I certainly don't believe in scaring people into heaven. I think there's an old school like Baptist preacher of fire and brimstone, and that's how people get saved. Scare them out of hell and into heaven in some way. I don't think that actually works or is helpful. But I do think this, and this is where I wanted to get us on the page here. We have to come to a good theology of hell, and we start here. Hell is real. It is a real place, and there is coming a judgment day where some will be saved to salvation. Heaven, we're about to see it, but also there will be those who will not be saved, but sent to hell. So let's get a few things straight. For one, hell is not nothingness. It's not annihilation. We're told that there is no rest. It goes on forever and ever and ever in a real physical place. Some people say it's where Satan lives. That's not true. Satan doesn't live in hell. One day he'll be condemned there as well. But he's not like sitting on a throne there right now. I've told you the story before of when I get my haircut. I always have good haircut stories. And my haircut, I'm talking to a lady, and she's like, finds out I'm a pastor, and then she makes that crazy statement. She says to me, oh, you're a pastor? Okay. Well, guess what? I'm going to hell, and all my friends are too. It's going to be a party. And I was like, oh, that's not, you don't have it right. Just your friends could be there with you but that's not the description we get in the Bible. We get a glimpse of what this winepress of God's wrath is. It's poured out in full strength, tormented with fire and sulfur. Forever and ever, there is no rest. It's something out of a nightmare, a horror film. Okay, so let me ask reevaluation question number 3, okay? Number 3. Do I know the weight of my sin? Do you understand this is that Jesus went to the cross to bear hell for you, to pay for your sin? So question number 1, which side of judgment am I on? Most important question. And then I got to ask myself this, even as a believer, am I being controlled by something that's going to fail me in the end anyways, that's going to fall, that God's going to destroy? But can we ask another, I think, good question? Do you really feel the weight of your sin? Of what God saved you from? By grace, he would save you from? And then finally, let's go back to the very beginning, the first 5 verses, because we actually get to see then what we are saved to, harvested to, judged to, and that is to heaven. So is endurance, obedience to the word worth it? Well, yeah. Remember the future, the promise of heaven. Look at verse 1. This is what heaven is. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him, can you underline that? And with him, 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. In heaven, we will be with the Lamb. Now, the question here is, who is the 144,000? Showed up back in chapter 7. You can go back and listen to that sermon. I told you then, I believe 144,000. It's not a statistic. It's a symbol. It represents something. It's not literally 144,000. In chapter 7, we see 144,000. Right after that, we see a great multitude worshiping before the throne. I believe it's one and the same. I think 144,000 represents all those who are redeemed. That's who it is. Some people would say it's just Jews, just the Jewish nation. Then you have the great multitude. Together they're worshiping. I don't think it really matters per se. What we see is those who are redeemed are, in this case, with him. Who? With the Lamb, with Jesus. Where are they at? It says Mount Zion. Now, Mount Zion was literally like a mountain outside of Jerusalem, but I don't think that's the place. This is in heaven. This is a place, this is where the Lamb at. The Lamb isn't on earth. The Lamb is in heaven, and we see that the redeemed are with him, those who have their name written on their foreheads, those who are identified as believers. They're with Jesus. The believers are with Jesus. So the point being this, whatever the dragon might throw at you, whatever Babylon might throw your way, endure. Why? Is it worth it? Yes, because one day you'll be with Jesus. And then verse 2 tells us what's going on. And I heard a voice from heaven like a roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. You ever been to that waterfall before where the water's crashing down? Well, I was at Niagara Falls last spring. You ever gone on a boat out there? The water is so, you can't talk. It's so loud. And this is what it is. It's like he hears in heaven a roar of many waters, the sound of loud thunder. What is this? This is the voice of believers. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. So it's a loud sound, but it's a beautiful sound. Verse 3, and they, who, the 144,000, the redeemed, were singing a new song before the throne, and before the 4 living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn the song except for the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. They're singing a new song. Believers are not only with Jesus, they are singing to Jesus. Singing is a natural expression of joy and celebration. Why is there singing? Because they have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Because it's not their blood poured out. It was Jesus' blood poured out. And so they respond in worship. Christianity is a singing faith. That's why we sing. We're going to sing again in our service because we ought to be a singing people, and we will do that for all of eternity. Now, I know some of you don't love singing. That's okay. Not God didn't all wire us the same. I do believe this. I really do believe this, that God did make us, that there's a natural response of joy and celebration for what God has done to us. Maybe we need to see the weight of our sin better so we can respond in worship. But for those of you who are like, heaven is a bunch of singing, and I'm not sure about that, it's not. Okay, there's this different sermon, another day. There's a lot of other activity taking place in heaven. But we see this happening. See this new song that is being sung by the redeemed there with Jesus. They're singing a song. Skip down to verse 13, because we skipped over this verse completely. Because here's the promise. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Did you catch that? Blessed are those who die, but not just anyone who dies. Who is it? Those who die in the Lord. Blessed indeed, says the spirits, that they may rest. You remember earlier on the other side there was no rest? They may rest from their laborers, for their deeds follow them. It's interesting because way back in chapter 1, verse 3, we see the first blessing. I referenced it earlier. It's why we've been reading Revelation every single week, because Revelation chapter 1, verse 3 says, blessed are those who read this book aloud, who hear it, and then who take it to heart, right? So we've just been practicing that. There are 7 blessings in the book of Revelation, a perfect number, 7 times. This is the second time it shows up. So the first time, you'll be blessed if you read it. Here's the second thing, you'll be blessed if you die in the Lord. That's the message that we see here. So reevaluation question number 4, the final question. Do I see the reward for the redeemed? Do you see it? This is what John is trying to get. Do you see heaven? Do you see that, man, do you see the waterfall? A day you'll be with Christ. Is it worth it? Absolutely. You're going to sing to him forever. And joy and celebration will be in heaven. Is it worth it? Yes. See the promise of heaven. So those are questions. Number 1, which side of judgment am I on? Do I really believe the gospel, the first angel? Am I controlled by something that will fall? We're told that one day Babylon will fall. Its promises will not deliver. Do I really feel the weight of my own sin? Can I see the reward of heaven someday, the reward of the redeemed? So, is it worth it? Remember the future. Now get this. We don't just remember the future, we have to remember the past. Because the past gives us eyes to see the future, which is why we take communion. Because Jesus told us, do this in remembrance of me. Because you, like me, we are a forgetful people. And we have to constantly be reminded of what Jesus did on the cross. Because in understanding what happened, it gives us eyes to understand what will happen. And so together we're going to take communion, the Lord's Supper, and remember what Jesus did. I was reading some different stuff this week, and I came across a really fascinating series of articles. This came out of BBC Radio in the UK, London. They were written by, the radio station actually was doing a series of articles on music and memory, of how, like, you know how this is, like, you hear a song and just, like, triggers these memories from the past. And so they got this guy, Adam Zeman, who's a professor of cognitive behavior neurology, university there in London, to talk about memory loss, who studied the study of memory loss, but also music. But the music side isn't what's interesting to me. He was talking about these 2 patients of his who suffered from amnesia, Peter and Marcus. And one of those guys said this, my memory of my past is a blank space. I feel lost and hopeless. I'm trying to explore the void. That sound terrible? Like, just it's like a blank hiss, doesn't know, can't remember. Both of these guys actually described that, like, looking at photos, they wouldn't even recognize themselves. Like, they would recognize themselves, but they wouldn't remember the moment. It was like, I know that's me, but I don't remember that photo taking place. One of them said it's like reading a biography of a stranger. Like, he's conscious of, like, memories just, like, literally slipping away from him. And he described it like a ship that's, like, been released from dock and just, like, escaping out into the fog, just disappearing, his memories go. Now, 2 things stood out to me, okay? I promise there's a point in this guy's essay that he was writing. The first is this. He said this, without memory, it's hard to cling to our identity. Without memory, without knowing who I was, it's hard to know who I am now. And one of the patients said it this way, I don't have the moorings, like connecting the dock, that other people draw on to know who they are. We have to remember something about our identity. Jesus dying on the cross for us declares that we are children of him if we believe. But then secondly, and this is what's really, like, just hit me, he said this, it's hard to have hope when we don't know our past. He said this, the inability to invoke the past greatly impedes their ability to imagine the future. And this is the message of Revelation, that we would see the past, Jesus' blood poured out for you, his body broken for you on the cross, buried and rises again. And because of that belief now, it informs the future of where I'm going. We have to remember the past so we can accurately remember the future. And so we're going to take communion together. I'm going to have Jason play the piano for us. Here's what we're going to do if you've never been here, been a part of this before. We have some guys. They're going to kind of pass out the tray. You'll take a little piece of bread. And here's what I want you to do. I just want you to take some time to pray. The Bible says that before you take communion, you got to evaluate your own heart. So what I wanted to do is I'm just going to leave these questions up here for you. Would you just pray through them? Man, God, where's my heart? Which side of judgment am I on? Am I a follower of Jesus? Listen, if you're here today and you've never done what Romans chapter 10 actually read earlier, that first chiasm, you've never confessed with your mouth, believed in your heart that Jesus is Lord, today's the day. Just as we're praying, we just pray, God, I know I've sinned. Thank you for sending Jesus to die in my place. I believe it. It's not because of something I've done. I want that. And you'll be saved. You'll be on the right side of judgment. I just pray. I would ask you to pray that before you take communion. But also evaluate your own heart, man. Are there things that you've given yourself over to, controlling you, that are eventually going to fall and not deliver? Or maybe you just need to pray, God, would you show me the weight of my own sin that you paid for on the cross so I could worship you better? Would you help me to get a vision of the reward of heaven someday, the reward of the redeemed? Communion is something that's sacred to us as believers, not because there's something mystical in it. Jesus, on that night he was betrayed, he passed around the bread and he said, take this, it is my body, a symbol of my body, not literally his body, but when we take it, remember his body broken. And then he passed around the cup, the wine, red like blood, and take it and remember his blood poured out. So that's what we're going to do. So they're going to pass it out, and you just hold on to that, and you take some time to pray. When it all gets passed out, I'll come back up here. We'll take it together. Remember his body broken. Then we'll pass out the cup, and we'll take it together, remembering his blood poured out. It's his blood poured out, not yours. So we remember that together today. So just take some time, pray through these questions. They'll pass out, and we'll take it together. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 said this, "For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" So remember his body broken for you. And God, we do. Remember your body broken for us. An act of grace from the heart of a Father that loves us, that he would send his Son. And God, we're thankful. We're thankful that you would choose to step into creation to save me, to save us. And God, I pray that as we consider our own lives, maybe there are things that we find ourselves controlled by. Maybe it's we need a better vision of heaven, God, but would you teach us to say it is worth it? It is worth the endurance to follow and obey and to have faith. God, teach us that because you sent your Son, his body broken for us. I pray as we consider our hearts and the blood that was poured out, that you would cause us to see our sin and confess that to you. Praise in your name. Amen. We'll pass out the cup. Verse 25, in the same way also he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." Remember his blood poured out. God, without the shedding of blood, there'd be no forgiveness of sin. So God, we're thankful that you would send your Son to die for us, to shed his blood for us. God, in response, I pray we would do as our text said, fear you, glorify you, worship you, that we would be ones who endure, who keep the commandments, live by faith. God, it is worth it because of your love for us, and I pray you remind us of that daily. I pray now as we rise and as we sing and we worship, God, that we'd worship from a heart understanding, God, who you are and what you have done for us. I pray all these things in your name. Amen.